There comes a time when silence becomes betrayal, not just of others, but of yourself. Too often we're told to bite our tongues, to smooth things over, to tolerate what should never be tolerated. But there's a line, and when it's crossed, you must find your voice. Not in rage, not in desperation, but in truth. Because truth is power. The moment you stop seeking approval from the ones who manipulate, who twist your words and blur your reality, that's the moment they begin to tremble. When you no longer explain, no longer defend, no longer react, that's when their grip weakens. You see, the most threatening thing to someone who feeds off your doubt is your clarity. Stand firm in your boundaries. Say, I know who I am. Not loudly, not defensively, just with quiet certainty. Let it be a statement, not an argument. Because the game they play only works when you're still playing. And when you step away, when you name what's real and refuse to shrink, that shakes the very foundation of their control. There's no need to shout, no need to expose or retaliate. You don't even have to speak their name. All you have to do is stand in your truth and say, you don't get to define me anymore. That single act is enough to make fear crawl through the cracks of their confidence. Don't underestimate the strength in walking away, in choosing peace over chaos, in choosing yourself. Because the day you stop being available for the lies, the guilt trips, the rewriting of your story, that's the day the mask slips and they realize they've lost their favorite illusion, control. Say it with your actions, say it with your silence, say it with your freedom, and know this, they will remember. They will fear the power you discovered within yourself, not because you exposed them, but because you saw through them and still chose to rise. There's a kind of power that doesn't need to shout to be heard. It doesn't demand attention, and it doesn't thrive on conflict. It just exists, steady, unwavering, undeniable. That power is truth. Not the kind of truth you scream in frustration, not the kind you try to convince others of, but the kind you carry within you, quietly. When you begin to speak from that place, when you let your truth guide your words and decisions, you step into something far stronger than any argument could ever be. The ones who manipulate and deceive are not afraid of confrontation, they thrive in it. They know how to twist your words, spin the narrative, and wear down your defenses. What they fear is someone who sees through the performance and simply refuses to engage. They fear the truth because it doesn't bend. It doesn't dance around feelings or illusions. It stands firm. And when you begin to live in that truth, when you speak not to defend yourself, but to declare your reality, you become something they can't control. There's no need for drama, no need to convince anyone. The people who try to gaslight you, who distort your memories and make you question your own judgment, lose their power the moment you stop needing their validation. When you say, this is how I see it, this is what I know to be real, without anger or apology, they feel it. Not because you've exposed them, but because you've stopped allowing yourself to be confused. Truth brings clarity, it cuts through the fog. And that clarity is what terrifies those who live in deception. They rely on your self-doubt. They count on you second-guessing yourself. So when you stop doing that, when you speak with certainty, when you trust your own perception and let that guide your choices, they begin to fall apart because their power was never real. It was borrowed. It existed only as long as you questioned yourself. It doesn't matter how long you've been quiet. It doesn't matter how many times you've tried to keep the peace. The moment you stop hiding from your truth is the moment everything changes. Speak it, not to them, but for yourself. And when you do, you'll realize you were never weak. You were just taught to believe your strength was a threat, but now you know better. Now you know that truth isn't just something you say, it's something you become. Some battles are not won by speaking louder, they're won by stepping back. Silence, when used with intention, becomes one of the most powerful tools you can wield. It's not about withholding your voice out of fear. It's about choosing not to waste your energy where it will only be twisted or drained. There is strength in walking away from the chaos and choosing not to engage with those who feed off your reaction. Because when someone tries to manipulate, provoke, or control, their greatest weakness is your refusal to play the game. People who thrive on control and deception are experts at triggering responses. They bait you into defending yourself, into explaining, into arguing, and while you're tangled in the drama, they're watching, calculating, spinning the narrative. But when you stop responding, when you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. You're no longer feeding the fire. And without your energy, without your reactions, they begin to lose their grip. Distance is clarity. The further you step away from the manipulation, the more clearly you see it for what it is. You start to notice the patterns, the games, the lies, and with that awareness comes freedom. Silence gives you room to think, to breathe, to reconnect with your intuition. And once you start trusting that inner voice again, the noise of their chaos becomes irrelevant. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's deliberate. It's a boundary in itself. It says, you don't get to have access to me anymore. And that terrifies someone who once believed they owned a piece of your mind. To them, your silence isn't just quiet, it's rejection, it's defiance, it's the end of their influence. They don't know what to do with it because it leaves them powerless. It takes away their favorite tool, your emotional response. Choosing distance doesn't mean you're weak. In fact, it's often the most courageous decision you can make. It means you value your peace more than their chaos. It means you've stopped needing to be understood by someone who never listened to understand you in the first place. And most of all, it means you've realized that your silence is not an absence of power, it's the presence of it. You're no longer available for manipulation, no longer a participant in a game rigged against your peace. You don't explain, you don't argue, you just exist, calm, grounded, and out of reach. And in that space, you begin to heal, you begin to rebuild. Because when you stop feeding the monster, it starves. And what once seemed like power over you begins to crumble in the face of your silence and distance. There's a quiet, unshakable strength in knowing where your line is and refusing to let anyone cross it. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are doors that only open to those who respect your value. And when you begin to enforce them, not with rage, but with calm certainty, you become untouchable to those who once thrived on your compliance. Those who try to control, manipulate, or belittle you rely on your willingness to bend. But when you stop bending, when you plant your feet firmly in the ground and say no more, everything begins to shift. Boundaries don't require explanation. They don't need approval. You don't owe anyone a reason for protecting your peace, your energy, your time. And that's what makes them powerful. The moment you stop justifying your limits is the moment you reclaim the parts of yourself that were slowly being chipped away. You no longer entertain guilt for saying no. You stop apologizing for having needs. You recognize that your well-being matters and that anyone who truly cares about you will never make you feel guilty for protecting it. For the manipulator, boundaries are terrifying because boundaries tell them you don't have control here. They're no longer able to guilt trip you, to wear you down, to twist your emotions to serve their needs. You're not giving them the access they once had. And when someone feeds off that access, the moment it's taken away, they panic. They may lash out. They may try to make you feel like you're the one being difficult or cold. But that's just their desperation speaking. It's not truth, it's fear. Because deep down, they know the old version of you, the one they could control, is gone. What's even more powerful than setting boundaries is honoring them. Not just once, not just when it's convenient, but consistently, over and over again, no matter how much someone pushes, manipulates, or pleads. You don't have to argue, you don't have to defend. You can simply say, this doesn't work for me, and let that be enough. The strength isn't in the noise, it's in the consistency. The truth is, when you enforce your boundaries, you begin to attract peace and repel chaos. People who respect you will draw closer. People who only valued your weakness will fall away. And while losing those people might hurt at first, what you gain in return, self-respect, clarity, and freedom, is worth far more than the approval of those who never truly saw you. You don't need to be aggressive to be powerful. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. All you need is to know what you will and will not allow, and then stand by it. That's the kind of strength that can't be manipulated. That's the kind of strength that sets you free. There's a kind of liberation that only comes when you stop looking outward for permission to be who you are, when you stop asking others to validate your experiences, your feelings, your worth, you reclaim something sacred, the right to define yourself. For too long, you may have allowed someone else to narrate your story. They labeled you, misunderstood you, judged you, and tried to shape you into something that served their needs. But when you finally say, I know who I am, and you mean it, you take that power back. No one gets to tell you who you are. Not the person who tried to manipulate you, not the one who made you feel small, not the one who used your kindness against you. Their version of you is a distortion, crafted to control. But the real you, the one beneath the noise, the fear, the conditioning, has always been there, waiting to rise. And when you start listening to your own voice more than theirs, you begin to remember. You remember your strength, your resilience, your truth. Saying, I know who I am, isn't about arrogance. It's not about being stubborn or refusing to grow. It's about anchoring yourself in reality, in identity, in self-trust. Because when you don't know who you are, anyone can tell you who to be. They can twist your emotions, make you question your choices, and plant seeds of doubt. That's how control begins, by disconnecting you from your core. But the moment you reconnect, the moment you choose your own definition, their influence starts to crumble. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to prove anything. You don't have to debate or convince anyone to see you clearly. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to know yourself so deeply that no lie spoken about you can shake you. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. Let them spin their stories. You are no longer in the business of explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. When you say, I know who I am, you stop chasing approval. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You no longer tolerate being around people who only love the version of you they can control. And that shift, it changes everything. You begin to choose your relationships more carefully. You value your time more. You protect your energy because you understand its worth. You become grounded, centered, and harder to manipulate, not because you've hardened, but because you've awakened. Your identity no longer depends on how someone else sees you. It's rooted in how you see yourself. And when you carry that kind of clarity, you walk differently. You speak differently. You move through the world with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to be explained or defended. It just is. And the ones who once tried to define you will realize they've lost the only power they ever had, the ability to make you forget your own. There's a moment in every person's life when they come to a crossroads. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but a quiet, internal shift where they finally choose peace over chaos. It doesn't happen all at once. It comes after countless arguments, after being drained, manipulated, and made to question your own sanity. It comes after trying over and over to fix what was never yours to fix. And then one day you stop. You don't yell, you don't fight, you just walk away. And in that simple, powerful act, you reclaim everything that was taken from you. Walking away isn't weakness. In fact, it takes more strength than staying ever did, because staying often comes from fear, fear of being alone, fear of judgment, fear that maybe you're the problem. But walking away means you finally remembered who you are. It means you've stopped settling for pain disguised as love, for control disguised as concern, for chaos disguised as passion. It means you've learned the difference between connection and captivity, and you've chosen freedom. There's power in silence, but there's even more in departure. When you leave a situation that's been draining your soul, you send a clear message, not to them, but to yourself. You say, I am worth more than this. You say, my peace matters more than your comfort. And those words, even if never spoken aloud, echo louder than any argument ever could. The people who once held power over you feel that absence, and it rattles them because they didn't expect you to leave. They expected you to stay and keep giving, keep apologizing, keep shrinking. But now you've chosen something different. You've chosen peace, not the kind that's handed to you by someone else, but the kind you create for yourself. And peace doesn't beg to be understood. It doesn't argue. It doesn't look back. It moves forward one step at a time, building a life that feels light instead of heavy, a life where you don't have to walk on eggshells, where you don't have to decode hidden meanings, where you don't have to constantly prove your worth. Walking away isn't about punishing anyone. It's about protecting yourself. It's about recognizing that no matter how much potential something had, if it's costing you your sanity, your joy, your identity, it's too expensive. And yes, it might hurt. Letting go often does, but that pain is temporary. The peace that follows, that's lasting. That's healing. That's the space where you can finally breathe again. When you choose to walk away, you don't lose anything real. You only lose the illusion that you had to endure suffering to be loved, to be seen, to be accepted. And once that illusion is gone, you're free. Free to build, to grow, to love yourself in a way that no one can take from you again. That is the true power of walking away, and it's a power they never wanted you to realize you had. Clarity is a quiet force that shakes everything built on illusion. When you finally see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be, not what you were told to believe, but what they truly are, you become untouchable. Manipulation only works when there is confusion. Control only thrives when there is self-doubt. But when you gain clarity, when your vision becomes sharp and your understanding becomes solid, the game changes. And the people who once pulled the strings behind the curtain begin to panic because they know you've seen through them. There is something terrifying to a deceiver about someone who no longer questions their reality. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop needing confirmation. You trust what you feel, what you know, what you've experienced, and the lies. The ones that used to bend your perception, to flip your words, to turn your heart against itself, lose their power. Because clarity doesn't argue with chaos. It doesn't entertain doubt. It just knows. And that knowing becomes a shield. Not a hard shell that blocks you from love or growth, but a quiet armor that protects your spirit. You walk differently when you're clear. You speak with purpose. You stop engaging in conversations that go nowhere. You stop being triggered by the same old tactics. You recognize the patterns. And more importantly, you no longer fall for them. Your clarity becomes your freedom. They will notice. They may not say it out loud, but they will feel it. They'll feel your absence, your detachment, your refusal to be drawn back in. What once worked so easily, those guilt trips, the blame games, the emotional traps, now fall flat. And behind their frustration, their confusion, their anger is fear. Fear of the version of you that no longer bends. Fear of the you that no longer needs their approval, their validation, their presence. Because the most powerful thing you can ever say to someone who tried to control you is not a threat, not an insult, not even a confrontation. It's the simple, steady declaration that lives in your actions. You no longer have access to me. That's what terrifies them. Not exposure, not revenge, clarity, the unshakable truth that you see them for who they are and that you've chosen to rise anyway. And so you rise not with vengeance, but with vision. Not with hate, but with healing. You don't need to destroy them to free yourself. You only need to remember who you are, speak your truth without fear, and walk away from anything that demands you forget your worth. That is your power, that is your peace, and that is what they will never be able to take from you again.